You're watching YPAC, Yakima Public Affairs Channel, serving the Yakima Valley for over 20 years. Next on YPAC, coverage of a Yakima Police Department news conference. The event was held at the Yakima Police Department on Wednesday, December 27th, 2017.
Three officer-involved shooting incidents in the last couple of days involving Yakima Police Department personnel. Today you're going to have the opportunity to hear from Captain Jeff Schneider, who is acting chief right now while Chief Dominic Rizzi is out of town. He can tell you a little bit of information about these incidents, including the names of the two officers who were involved in the incidents on December 26th. I just want to remind folks that this is an opportunity for media to ask questions, and generally speaking, we won't be taking questions from just general audience members. So, Captain Schneider.
Thank you. Well, first let me start off and say the information we have is very preliminary. A lot of your questions I'm not going to be able to answer, either because it's going to compromise the investigation or because officers involved simply haven't been interviewed, so I don't know the answers to your questions. But I think the way we're going to do this is we're going to walk through this chronologically, and we'll take questions at the end. So we're going to start with the first incident that happened on Christmas Day about 7 p.m., and this is the one in the 300 block of West Pierce Avenue. Initially, Yakima Police Department was called to this residence by a member of the residence there and said that a person had arrived. He was intoxicated. He claimed that he had shot two people, and there was no indication where that or when that had happened. Once officers got there, they encountered Adrian Escobar. He's 29 years old. Immediately he produced a handgun, put it to his head, said he was going to kill himself. He went back into the residence. Officers retreated back out of the residence and surrounded it. After that, it was about a 5-hour back and forth negotiation process with him. During the course of this, he fired a number of rounds at officers. We did have our SWAT team respond. We also had the Benton County SWAT team up here. The reason for the second SWAT team, because you know the temperature was so cold, it requires a lot of rotation between officers because they can only be outside for so long at these type of temperatures. At some point he again fired. This is about 12:30 in the morning. Now we're on the 26th. At that point, one of our SWAT officers returned fire. He was killed by that return fire. The Washington State Patrol is going to handle this investigation. The officer involved in that shooting is Officer Booker Ward. His first name is Booker, Ward, W-A-R-D. He's 36 years old. He's been with the department for 8 years. So we'll move on to the second incident. That also started Christmas Day. It started about a half hour later at 7:30 p.m. And this is at the Cascade Apartments, 20 East Sergeant Pendleton Way, downtown Yakima. Officers received a call from residents at that apartment that the suspect, Jose Garcia, who's 31 years old, had threatened them with a handgun. Once our officers arrived, he was in his apartment. They engaged in dialogue for quite some time. Our officers could hear him speaking inside the apartment as if there was someone inside. Later we learned there was no one else inside. They could also hear what they felt was a slight action to a handgun being worked, so giving some indication that probably he did have a gun inside. Again, this took about 5 hours of back and forth negotiation with him. Eventually the officers there obtained a search warrant to go in and arrest him. They breached the door because he refused to open it, breaching meaning forced it open. And again, they engaged in dialogue to try to get him to surrender. At some point, that situation deteriorated, probably about 5 to 10 minutes after they breached the door. Shots were fired by our officers, and he was killed. I can't tell you the exact circumstances of what those officers saw, simply because we don't know it because they haven't been interviewed yet. Yakima Police Department detectives are handling that investigation, and the two officers involved in firing shots at that one, Officer Shane Stevie, S-T-E-V-I-E, he's 28 years old, and he's been with the department 3 years. And Officer Patrick Shad, S-H-A-D, he's 25 years old and has been with the department 1 year. Moving on to the next incident, on the 26th of December, about 6:20 p.m. Officers were called by a citizen to a residence in the 800 block of South 4th Avenue. They reported that a wanted person, wanted for a shooting in Union Gap the previous day, that person's name is Gabriel Zabella, was at that location. Officers arrived. The first officer there contacted a person he saw in the yard, and this person immediately opened fire on the officer. The officer and the suspect engaged in a back and forth exchange of gunfire. Quite a few shots were fired during this exchange. The suspect eventually was able to jump into his car, a big pickup SUV type vehicle, and backed into our patrol car, knocking it aside, and then fled. The officer was not injured, and there was no indication that the suspect was hit by the gunfire either. Almost immediately following that, just about a half block down the street, a second officer was also engaged in gunfire and exchanged gunfire with him as he was fleeing, the second officer having responded to the scene to assist. We are not going to release their names until tomorrow. Generally, we give the officers 24 hours before we release those names. So we will do that tomorrow. A little while later, we received another citizen tip that this same suspect was at a residence in the 1300 block of South 12th Avenue. Our officers took up a position, again activated the SWAT team, and again we had an extended period of negotiation, many hours. There was no indication that Mr. Zavella wanted to surrender at all. Eventually he came outside of the building he was in, which was an outbuilding there. At the time he was armed. Again, our officers fired shots. He was injured. He's currently in Harborview. His injuries do not appear to be life-threatening. So he's in Harborview under guard right now. And again, we will release the names of the officer involved in that shooting tomorrow. As far as the investigations, the Washington State Patrol will investigate the shooting on 12th Avenue, and the Yakima Police Department will investigate the two officers that fired shots on 4th Avenue. So that's really all we have for now. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
One of the questions that I did have is just based on a previous officer-involved shooting that happened near Tieton. So can you tell me exactly how many YPD officers are currently on paid leave?
Right now we have 5 officers on administrative leave.
And how are you able to supplement the loss of those 5 officers at the moment?
Overtime. Any other questions?
Is this the first time the YPD has had 3 officer-involved shootings in a 24-hour period?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we've even had 2 officer-involved shootings in a 24-hour period before. It's obviously very unusual for law enforcement to face this level of threat. Anything else?
Are you able to go into any details or the reasoning behind why YPD is investigating certain parts of these shootings and
Sure.
why it's on other ones?
Really, it's just a matter of capacity. Right now, we have, from the State Patrol, we have 2 different districts. 2 of the 5 State Patrol districts detectives are in Yakima handling investigations, and obviously the State Patrol has a fairly large scope of responsibilities. They can't dedicate all their detectives to the city of Yakima. So we have to share that responsibility with the State Patrol. So it's simply a matter of who can do it, who has the capacity. And obviously we're the largest agency in the area, so we have to take our share.
And then I understand that SWAT during this time, through the entire year, has been called out 28 times this year, which I understand is at least double more than normal. So can you speak to exactly what kind of why they've been called out more often, I guess?
Well, they've been called out more often because we've had more incidents that involve a threat. At the same time, we're more involved with de-escalation of incidents, and a lot of times to de-escalate, it takes more manpower because you have to secure a scene and you may have to hold it. For example, in these incidents, we're talking about holding incidents a total of 15 hours, 15, 16, 17 hours. It takes a lot of manpower to do it. So we can't do that with existing resources necessarily. We have to call in extra people, which a lot of times for armed confrontations is SWAT. And many times, almost all the time, that results in a successful apprehension without anybody being hurt.
And is there any indication of why there might be so many shootings in a short amount of time?
No. Any other questions?
Were any of these incidents considered gang-related?
No, not really. All right then. Thanks
Other
everybody for
questions?
coming.
One other point that we do want to make sure that folks understand is that we want to thank many community members who provided information to the police that allowed a response from the police, particularly in the case of the event that occurred last evening, giving information about the location of that suspect.
Yes, to build on what Randy said, if you look back on all these incidents were initiated by citizens contacting the police department to let us know about wanted persons or criminal activity. So that's certainly what we like to see. It keeps the community safer.
All right.
I can get one last
Yeah,
question.
sure.
Real quick. Is there any way you could put into perspective, like having this amount of shootings compared to, I guess, the rest of the year? What is this like for YPD? Just to put in the scope for you guys.
Yeah, it's really busy. Both from the patrol and the detective standpoint, everyone's operating with very little sleep, with no days off. Many officers and detectives have been working their vacation periods, but that's what we do.
Good luck.
Okay.
I just have one last question
Okay.
regarding, I know the Cascade Apartments, they were saying the man that was shot, he was blind. Can you talk to me a little bit about that situation?
He is blind. I don't know the exact circumstances of why he's blind or anything. I think he's completely blind. We do know that he had an extensive criminal record with assaults, so apparently this has been problematic for some time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.